What's up, everybody? Mike Johnson, Yellow Buffalo here. Just kicking back. Good to see you on the channel again. I actually looked because I didn't think I was getting any views. I didn't think I was getting any subscribers or anything. I have been getting subscribers. What's up, subscribers? Hey, appreciate it. I have been getting views. What's up, viewers? Hey, I appreciate it. That's super awesome. Yeah, I'm really here, hoping that what I say is helpful. Hoping what I say is helpful to me, helpful to anybody who watches, and it's just trying to bridge that gap. Trying to bridge that gap because a lot of the things that we're seeing, a lot of the things that we're hearing these days is just pulling us further and further apart. And I know I've said some things, and I wanted to dive into a couple of those things. But I want to let you know that we are in this together. We're in this together. And the reason why is because we can't go anywhere else. You can't be like, you can't disassociate yourself from this planet. We are here. We all share the same air. We all share the same ground. We all share the same water. It all comes from the same place. So when people want to pretend like they're an island and that nothing affects them, then that's when we have problems. And I get into that. You've got to imagine me a couple of years ago. I don't need anybody. I'm doing this by myself. I'm being, and here's the thing. I wasn't saying, I didn't need anybody at all. I wasn't saying that, I was, it was just more me saying that I'm finally doing this by myself. And don't get me wrong, I've got help, left and right, with, the things that I need. I'm not by myself. If the electricity weren't harnessed, Bonneville Dam, if the electricity weren't harnessed, then I wouldn't be able to do any of these kinds of things. If somebody else didn't build this home, this apartment complex that I'm living in, I wouldn't be able to sit here. If somebody didn't build this chair, somebody didn't make this computer. See? So when I was saying that, I wasn't, a couple of years ago, I wasn't disassociating myself with the society around me. I was more saying that, interpersonal drama is not my thing. Interpersonal drama is not my thing. And I'm surprised that I didn't have the words to say that at that time. I was drinking at the time. And I would usually say that when I had been drinking. And I would usually say that after an unpleasant circumstance with somebody who I knew. So I think for me, just being in this, I've got a place of my own. This is so awesome. Not everybody can do that. Not everybody can afford to. Not everybody has the help and the resources to be able to do those things. Not everybody can work enough to have a place of their own, or what have you. There's many reasons why somebody can have a place of their own, and it's not illegal. Thank God it's not illegal. I spent most of my adult life with roommates, and this is the reason why this is so important to me. And I've got Gus, so it's not like I'm completely by myself, which I have been, and it wasn't pretty. It really wasn't pretty. The conversation was wild, and I can't say that if I were alone now, it would be the same. But I also know that I had to go through all of these gates. I had to experience all of these things in order for me to look at the conversation and go, no, I've already done this. So this is something that I find to be very helpful. I was thinking about this a couple of days ago. I was just like, man, when you guys were saying that someone's gonna be bouncing around in my living room while I'm sleeping, you were talking about my dog. They made it seem scary. They made it seem, unhealthy. It's just the way that these things come to you is just. I've had those things. Why is it that I find myself? Why did I find myself getting messages that were so twisted? Well, it's because the people who I was around had twisted perspectives. And so it's like the conversation that I have is either mimicking or learning from interactions that I have with other people. There were people who I spent a lot of time with back in the day that I just don't talk to anymore. And it's because we either just grew apart, or B, there was too much abuse. And it's usually the latter that makes me get out of a relationship. I don't like dysfunctional relationships. I don't like abusive and unhealthy relationships. I don't like toxic relationships. And for the longest time, as I've spoken about my codependency, I was codependent on toxic people and on toxic relationships. And I found myself in 2020 with nowhere to go, with no one really to depend on, because I kept on going to people and they had their own stuff that they had to deal with. So I could only be there for so long, obviously, and so I found myself on my birthday watching Infinite Waters, breathe. Can I get a hello there? And I'm sitting there crying as I'm walking down the street, not knowing where I'm going to go. I had a place coming, in a week, but, it was still my birthday. I was homeless and I was depressed, and I'm sitting there, can I get a hello there? Breathe with me, So I had to learn how to depend on myself emotionally. I had to learn how to depend on myself socially. How can you be social by yourself? Well, that's a great question. If I didn't have an entire conversation going on in the sky, maybe I could tell you the answer to that. But I feel like I'm never alone. So, I think that's a good space to come to this. So, I mentioned Infinite Waters, Ralph Smart. Super awesome. The stuff that he does for people. And without him and without people like him, I don't know if I'd have gotten through the struggles that I was going through, because the people that I was around had their stuff. It's like all the crazy came out of everyone in 2020. And I didn't know what to do. So having that sort of connection, and people get it from everywhere. You get it from pastors, you can get it from teachers, you can get it from pop stars, or just regular YouTubers like myself. Yay! So the fact is that I had to learn to be independent. I had to learn to be independent. And here's a perfect example. I've got Gus, which, you guys have probably seen him in some of my shorts. The phrasing, I know. I've seen him in the shorter videos that I've done, like 15 seconds. This guy's but he has been thoroughly abused by the world. As I have been being abused, he has also been being abused. The last set of neighbors that we had, they got kicked out because they were being threatening, and their their lives were negatively affecting the people around them, me included. And there was a huge story about this person, like that they were consorting with, demons, etc., and that they were trying to be my spiritual rival, and that we were supposed to battle one another. And it was strange because Gus did started acting very strangely, around this time. And I didn't know what was going on. It was to the point where I was actually scared of him. I'm like, what am I doing being scared of a 14-pound dog? It's like, yeah, if he bit me in a certain place, I could die, because he does have really sharp teeth. But, unless he snuck up on me, then I really have nothing to worry about, and I had to keep him in his kennel. I'd feed him and all that kind of stuff. But I had to do that for a couple of days because the story that was going on in my mind was so scary. So scary. And this person who I felt like I was battling with, they really just wanted to do what they do without consequence. And there's the difference. I used to think I was skating by through life, until I realized that I was dealing with everything emotionally. Until I realized that I was experiencing all of these things, and that I wasn't just skating by through life. It's harder, it's so comfortable doing this. I know, like, it's harder, when you are rigorously honest. It's harder when you have that sense of personal responsibility. It's harder when you have that moral inventory, and you have that, you become your own superego. You become your own sense of morality. It's not, "Ooh, what would my parents think?" It's, "Oh, what do I think about that?" Because this time 100 years ago, there were some pretty wicked things going on. And I'm not talking wicked in a good way. This time, 60 years ago, there's some pretty bad things going on. As a society, as a culture, right now, there's some pretty bad things going on. And so we look at these things, and it's like, well, how do we get out of it? How do we get out of this fairy tale that we're in and still stay positive? How do we pull the wool from over our eyes and not be depressed? And I say to keep an attitude of gratitude. If you wake up in the morning, be grateful. if you can get out of bed and you can go about your daily business, be thankful. There are people who can't move. You know, I'm reminded of that every day when I'm going about my daily business. My hips are starting to get a little worse. They start to lock up. So when I go to bend my knees, I have to take longer to do it. I have to wait until these muscles relax enough to let me bend my leg. So I say I'm thankful, every time I'm able to stand up, every time I'm able to sit down, every time I'm able to walk, because I know what it feels like not to be able to do that. There were times before before I got on this new medication, there were times where I would my dose would run out, and I would go to stand up and my legs would lock up so tight that I wouldn't be able to move. And I was freaking out because I didn't have my cane anywhere near me. I didn't really have anything to rest myself onto. It was scary. It felt like I was in the middle of the ocean, standing on a log with nowhere to go. So I'm grateful that I can get up and I can walk and I can move. You guys don't see it, but I sit down here for this 30 minutes and I talk and then I stand up. It takes a minute, but I do it and I'm successful, so I'm happy. I've known lots of people who were confined to wheelchairs. I've known people who were fully paraplegic. I have a cousin who passed, some time ago that was a vegetable, So I feel very blessed that I am capable of so many things. I cook meals every day, almost every day. I am grateful to have the food that I have in my fridge and in my cupboards. I am grateful to have the knowledge of cooking. I know how to make things that taste good. I know how to cook without burning things. I did burn something on Sunday. I was doing Brussels sprouts. It's really weird. I'm used to frozen Brussels sprouts, but when you get them fresh, it doesn't take that long to roast those things. And that cornbread took a little longer, but I was also taking care of some other important things as well. Multitasking does not mean you're doing things faster. It just means you're doing more things at once. So, I know I'm talking about a whole bunch of different things right now, and I really wanted to touch on a couple of things that I said yesterday. And I want you to know that when I say these things, this is a response to a mentality that has been taught to me over and over and over again. Well, we believe this way, why can't you? And I say, well, because I don't fit in your club. I'm not a part of your group. Yeah, you are. Go on. But the thing is, not everybody who you like is going to like me. And I will say that for every possible group I can think about. If I'm in a group full of predominantly white people, most of the time it's going to be cool. But then there's those rare occasions where you'll find that person who's either outwardly racist or closet racist, and they'll do their thing. Me being queer, I am not obvious. I don't think I ring too many people's gaydars. But the fact is, when I hear stuff that people say, it affects me. And then I have to question whether or not I'm going to say something to them about it. Excuse me. I have to question whether or not I'm going to say something to them about it. And usually I do. Because I feel like it's my job to just completely, screw with everyone's minds. Just I walk in the room and what the, for the longest time. And I think it was when I realized exactly who I was that things changed. But I remember walking into a room full of strangers and the room would just light up. People would just automatically be happy. Now, people look at me with like quizzical stares, like they don't understand me. Like I'm an oddity or that I'm so different. There's a lot that goes into that. I understand, I'm a black guy with light skin and blonde hair. Oh, so different. I'm chosen. So different. I don't look at myself as any different from anyone else. I am an infinite, eternal, multidimensional spiritual being having a temporary human experience, just like everybody else. I am a God, little g, just like everyone else. I just realized it a little sooner than a lot of other people. And I guess the problem that I have is this world that we have created, with our belief systems is evil. The world itself isn't evil, but the world that we've created based off of our perception, based off of our thoughts, based off of our beliefs is evil. Why would you believe that a blank slate is sinful? A baby is not sinful. We learn that stuff over time. We learn how to lie. We learn how to steal. We learn how to do these things over time. They're saying we were born into a sinful world. But the fact is, a tree isn't sinful. The ocean isn't sinful. A river, a lake, a squirrel. I don't know. Squirrels can be pretty cheeky. They can do stuff, Animals, they can do stuff for raccoons, getting your trash. But is it sinful? There's so much that we want to say is sin. And it's because we want to be right in the light of someone else being wrong. Because we've been taught that. We have been taught, well, at least I'm not as bad as that person. At least I didn't do something as bad as that person. At least I'm not like that person. At least I'm not as ugly as this. At least I'm not as stupid as this. At least I'm not as... And all that's doing is projecting. You're projecting your insecurities onto somebody else. Why not take a look at yourself? An unexamined life is a life not worth living. No, I can't recall who said that. But an unexamined life is a life not worth living. Actually, let me ask Google. Seeing as we're here, who said an unexamined life is a life not worth living? Socrates appearing in Plato's Apology. Okay. So that's the point. I have gone through my life and I have looked and I have said, wow, that was bad. Wow, that was ugly. Wow, that was awesome. You know why? Because the first thing you get is the ugly. The first thing you get is the really, really bad. The first thing you get is the thing that's going to make you want to turn away. And then you see how awesome you are. It's kind of like a life review, I've noticed. It's like, because the conversation at first was acting like I was having a mock funeral. And it was like the first couple of years was, I knew him when I knew him. And then it became from a mock funeral to, oh, now he's famous. And then it became, but it was always this, I knew him when. And it's like the idea, I guess, is who will you be when you die? Who's going to be at your funeral? Who's going to be there to carry your casket if that's what you want? You know, who's going to pay for your expenses? I'm thinking about that because my sister at age 37 just passed last April. Just past April. And so I have to be like, well, okay, my mom passed at 57. My dad passed at 63. You know, what? Well, I mean, my grandparents, my grandma on my mom's side is still alive. You know, she's in her 80s. My grandparents on my dad's side both passed in their 80s. Great-grandparents, they all lived to be pretty old. So that's what I'm working on. I quit smoking. I quit drinking. You know, I quit doing drugs. So now I'm expecting to have a good, long life, right? I don't want this good, long life with this conversation that I've got going on. You know, this mental conversation is kind of a pain. It's really a pain, you know, and I wish I could say that it were my ancestors, but right now it seems like I'm teaching the next generation. It seems like instead of me getting answers, I'm the one who's giving the answers. Instead of me getting lessons, I'm the one who's giving the lessons. And I am, you know, if that's the way this is, and I'm a galactic teacher, and that's something that I need to walk in. It's something I need to walk in because I've been a teacher as a human, you know, and now if this is something that I have to do, you know, teach these spiritual beings before coming into their next incarnation, then I can do that. But I'm going to do that as a person, as a human, not as a what, but as a who. Because I can wave all the flags that I want, but that's not me. That's an expectation of me. You know, the video that I did yesterday, I want everyone to know that the understanding that I have of myself is always going to be different than the understanding anybody else has of me. And that goes for you too. Your perspective of yourself is always going to be different than other people's perspective of you. There's what you see, there's what they see, there's what you think they see, and then there's what they think that they see. And then there's what there actually is. See? So I can look at my tone and be like, that was a little loud, wasn't it? Or I can be like, maybe they just thought I was excited. It's this way. It's this way. I have a perspective of my world and your perspective of your world. And then when we come together, you have a perspective of our world, and I have a perspective of our world. Me and yours, and you and mine. So let's start looking at our perspectives. If the thoughts you have are critical of someone else, take a step back and say, what is it that I'm hiding about myself from myself? What is it that I'm projecting onto somebody else? Because that's what it is. All right, y'all. Have a good day. I love you. Peace.